So good morning. It looks like all of us are still here. Good news. I hope everyone who's been joining this course is still there as well. So actually, the Tibetan teachers say when we get up in the morning, we wake up in the morning, it's good to think, hey, I'm still here. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that wonderful? I'm still alive, because there are people who die during the night, who don't wake up in the morning. So the fact that we wake up is really fortunate, something to feel joyful about. So that's because we have a precious life, a precious human rebirth with opportunities to learn and practice the Dharma and create the causes for higher states of mind, especially enlightenment, and also just do a lot of good things for the benefit of others in the world. So it's important to have awareness of that and feel joyful about that, and then put our energy into doing what is beneficial. So we'll start with prayers as we did yesterday, and then I thought today to start with meditation on some of the things we were looking at yesterday afternoon. So take a few more moments to generate a positive motivation for being here, joining this session. If you're comfortable with the idea of bodhicitta, attaining enlightenment, awakening, Buddhahood, in order to be of the greatest possible benefit to all living beings, to help all of them emerge from suffering and reach Buddhahood as well, then you can bring that into your mind and aspire that this session will help us get closer to enlightenment and being able to help all other beings in such a wonderful way. If you're not so familiar with or comfortable with that motivation, try to generate some kind of altruistic motivation that you do feel comfortable with. For example, just thinking, I really want to help others as much as I can in this life, and may I learn something from this session that will help me to be more helpful for others. So you can use your own thoughts, your own words, but something along those lines. So yesterday afternoon, we were looking at one of the discourses of the Buddha, which gave advice on how, when our body is sick, our mind doesn't have to be sick as well. It's possible to have a sick body, but a healthy mind. And the advice on how to do that, how to achieve that, included learning not to be so identifying with our body, believing this body is me. So just take a look at your own attitude, your own feelings about your body, and try to see if you do see your body as something permanent and unchanging and who you are. So just explore that in your own experience. Do you see your body as unchanging? Although intellectually we might say, no, I know my body is changing, but do you actually understand experientially that your body is changing every moment, getting older and older, and will one day cease to exist? That's something you really feel, you really understand. also check to see if you identify with your body. For example, when you see a reflection of yourself in the mirror, do you have the feeling, that's me? And thoughts like, oh, I look good today, or I don't look good today. And when the body is sick, do you have the feeling, I am sick? When there's pain, do you feel, I am in pain? And one day, the body will die, and then it will be buried or cremated, disposed of in some way. So what happens to you then? Do you cease to exist with nothing remaining? So the Buddhist explanation is, when we die, our mind goes through changes. Even before we actually die, our gross thoughts and perceptions and feelings, emotions that are related to this present life, like who we are and what our relationships with others are and what our job was and so on, all of these gradually cease and disappear. And our mind becomes more and more subtle. It goes to a subtler level. And in Vajrayana Buddhism, they talk about an extremely subtle level of mind, which is called clear light. Kind of way down below our normal thoughts and emotions and perceptions. And this clear light mind becomes manifest at the time of death. And that's the part of us that leaves the body and goes off to take another life, another rebirth. And when it does find itself in a new body, a new life, then the gross thoughts, conceptions, ideas, emotions start up again, but with a new identity, a new person, a new name, a new family, a new language. And then our mind develops all these thoughts related to that person, that personality. So the clear light mind isn't a soul, a fixed identity, a something that goes from life to life, but more like a potential to become a person and to have lots of thoughts and feelings and perceptions and an identity. But this clear light mind is also the part of our mind that will one day become awakened or enlightened and be the mind of a Buddha. Because it's naturally pure and clear, and the afflictive emotions like ignorance, attachment, anger, and so on are not permanent parts of the mind, but can be cleared away, purified, removed forever. And this is why yogis, accomplished meditators in the Vajrayana tradition, are not afraid of dying and even look forward to it, because they know they'll have a chance to experience the clear light mind and work with it and possibly attain enlightenment, even in the process of dying. Or if that isn't possible, to at least get closer to enlightenment, create more causes of enlightenment. So that may be hard for us to do as we are dying, but we can at least develop more awareness of this clear light mind that lies within us, and a confidence that there's more to us than just this physical body, which is going to die one day. And to learn to let go of our attachment to our body and our identification with our body. And one of the best ways to do that is to get familiar with these ideas, more than ideas, but actual facts of impermanence, the changing nature of things, and death, the fact that death is going to happen. Getting more comfortable, more familiar with those ideas can help us to gradually lessen our attachment to our bodies and our tendency to identify with them. So yesterday, a question was sent in about awareness of death, this term marana sati. So marana is the Pali term for death, and sati means mindfulness or recollection of death, so recollection of death. And in this book, there is a discourse from the Buddha about that. And by the way, I didn't mention this before, but the discourses in this book are not from the Pali canon. They are from the Chinese agamas. I don't know how to say that word. Are you familiar with that term, agama? Yeah, I hadn't encountered it before. So he translated these from the Chinese and some from the Tibetan. So that means he knows not only Pali but also Chinese and Tibetan and can translate. The agamas, how do you say it? Agama. So these are collections of discourses that are parallel to the Nikayas in the Pali tradition. So the Pali canon contains these, I don't know how many Nikayas are there. There's the Majjhima Nikaya, and the Samyutta Nikaya, Digha Nikaya, the long discourses. Yeah, so they're collections of sutras or discourses from the Buddha, and they're called the Nikayas. I guess Nikaya means discourse. So the agamas are parallel to that. So they are also collections of discourses. And so he said most of the discourses in this book are from the Samyukta Agama, which is parallel to the Samyutta Nikaya. Yeah. And he chose to translate from the Agamas rather than the Pali canon because he said there's Pali canon's already translated. There's already at least 2 translations of all the Pali sutras. So he wanted to translate these. He said most of these have not been translated before, and they're close but not exactly the same. So in the footnotes with each discourse, he'll give the equivalent, the parallel version in the Pali tradition and point out differences between them. Another interesting thing is he said. They're most of them are from the Samyukta Agama, and thereby from a textual lineage transmitted by a Buddhist school known as Mulasavastavadan. So the Mulasavastavadan Vinaya is the one followed by the Tibetans. So our Tibetan teachers and Tibetan monks and nuns received their ordination in the Mulasavastavadan tradition of the Vinaya. So some of these early discourses of the Buddha are also available in Tibetan. Maybe not all of them, I don't know. We'd have to do a lot of research to go into that. But anyway, these are scholarly matters. Yeah, so there's a discourse in here about recollection of death. So I'll read parts of it, but it's a bit long to read the whole thing. So this takes place in Sravasti, in India. And so the Buddha is with some of his monastics, and he says to them, "You should cultivate the perception of death and give attention to the perception of death." And then one of the monastics speaks up and says, "I constantly cultivate giving attention to the perception of death." And the Buddha asks him, "How do you do this?" And the monastic says, "At the time of giving attention to the perception of death, I have the aspiration to remain alive for 7 days and give attention to the 7 awakening factors. In the Tathagata's teachings, that would be of much benefit, and I will not regret passing away after that. Blessed One, it is like this that I give attention to the perception of death." The Blessed One said, "Stop, monastic. This is not truly an undertaking of the practice of the perception of death. This is called being of a negligent nature." So the Buddha was not impressed with this person's practice. And then it goes on. Other monastics speak up, and they're saying pretty much the same thing. The only difference is the number of days. So the first one was 7 days, and the next one is 6 days, and then it goes 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 1 day. And each time the Buddha says, no, that's not the right way to do it. And then finally one monastic says, I can do it. And the way he does it is, he says, "When the time has come, I put on my robes, take the alms bowl, and enter Sravasti to beg for alms. Having begged for alms, I return back to leave Sravasti and return to my place. I enter my meditation hut to give attention to the 7 factors of awakening. Then I might reach the end of life. It is thus that I attend to the perception of death." So he's a little bit closer. He's thinking right now, today, I might end my life. But again, the Buddha says, no, this is not the way to do it. And then he goes on to say that he mentions this monastic named Vakali. I don't know who he is, but anyway, he was a disciple who knew how to do this practice properly. And so the Buddha said, "You should be like him. You should practice like him." He says, that monastic is well able to give attention to the perception of death, being disenchanted with this foul and unclean body. So that's a big meditation in Buddhism, especially for monastics, to contemplate the nature of our body and how it's made of all this stuff that we normally don't consider attractive, like blood and guts and bones and so on. So if you really look at what your body's made of, it's difficult to find anything that's really beautiful and pure and attractive. So that really helps to detach from the body. Then the Buddha goes on, if a monastic gives attention to the perception of death, collecting his mindfulness in front, I think what that means is just like here and now, being mindful here and now, with a mind that is unshaken, being mindful of the exhalation and the inhalation for the time it takes for them to go out and return. And during that period, he gives attention to the 7 awakening factors. That would indeed be of much benefit to him, in the Tathagata's teaching. This is because all formations are entirely empty. They all become appeased. They rise and cease. They are like a magical illusion that is without any true essence. Therefore, monastics, you should give attention to the perception of death in the interval between an out-breath and an in-breath, so that you will be liberated from birth, old age, disease, death, grief, worry, pain, and vexation. In this way, monastics, should you train yourselves. And the monastics, hearing what the Buddha has said, were delighted and received it respectfully. So I'll read some of Bhikkhu Analayo's kind of commentary. He calls it discussion, but yeah, it's sort of explanation of this sutra. So he first talks about the version in the Nikaya. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya, and some differences between the Pali and the Chinese versions of the sutra. And then he says, but in all of them, the central message in all of these discourses is that recollection of death needs to be applied directly to the present moment. And not thinking, oh, maybe it'll happen in a week, or in 6 days, or maybe tomorrow, but it could happen right now in this moment. This need arises from the certainty of death combined with the uncertainty of when death will come. So those are like the first two of the three main parts of the 9-point death meditation that you meditated on yesterday and today, that death is certain, death is definitely going to happen. Then the time of it is uncertain. We just don't know. There's no way of knowing when it's going to happen. And even if you go to a fortune teller or a palm reader, or there are people who might give you a prediction of when it's going to happen, but I don't know. And I've also heard about some Christian preachers who will get this idea that, the world is going to end at a certain point. It was a big thing some years ago, right? 2012, was it? Was it 2012? Not too long ago. A lot of people really believed that was going to be the end of the world. They even made a movie about it, I heard. Anyway, we're still here. So these people who make predictions like that, we can't really know if they're right or not. So, yeah, it could be any day, any moment. And then he goes on to say, those who envisage their own death taking place at some time in the future, even if this is only a single day, are considered to be negligent in their practice. Instead of such negligence, acknowledging one's own mortality needs to be coupled with diligence, with the awareness that death can happen right now, in the sense that death is right now approaching me. And then he goes on to talk about some Western, psychologists or researchers or whatever, did some research into fear of death and came up with some therapy to help people with their fear of death. I kind of skipped over that part. But then he gives more practical instructions on how to do the actual practice of awareness of death or recollection of death. He says, one can undertake this type of practice of bringing one's own mortality into present moment awareness in accordance with the above instructions through mindfulness of the breath. Mindfulness of each breath just needs to be yoked firmly to awareness of the fact that this breath could be the last breath one will take. The actual practice I like to recommend for this involves relating the perception of one's own mortality, especially to the inhalations. In this way, with every breath coming in, one is aware that this could be one's last inhalation. And with every exhalation, one trains oneself to let go and relax. In the latter part of the book, I haven't read the whole book, but there's a whole section on actual meditation instructions. So in there, he does give instructions on how to do this practice. Practicing in this way enables one to adjust the intensity of one's recollection of death so as to maintain mental balance and to proceed in accordance with one's personal abilities and the requirements of the present situation. At times, the thought of one's death can become quite challenging, even leading to fear and agitation. So it's good to acknowledge that, that it takes a while and practice to get to the point where you can think about death without feeling fear or agitation or other kinds of emotions coming up. So that's quite normal. And he says if this should happen, one emphasizes being aware of the exhalations and of letting go. So you focus more on the exhalation and let go and relax. This helps to calm the mind. It's also kind of like what Rick Hansen says in the Buddha's Brain, focusing on the exhalation, especially if it's a long, slow exhalation, that really helps to calm down and relax. At other times, it can happen that practice has become somewhat sluggish or automatic. The fact of one's own mortality is not really making an impact on the mind. So you get kind of complacent about it and, yeah, I'm going to die, but so what? In such a situation, one puts more emphasis on the inhalations, on the fact that this could be the last breath taken in. There can be no doubt that one will breathe one's last breath sooner or later. And with equal certainty, this moment is coming closer and closer with every breath one takes. I've heard and read that they can actually calculate how many breaths we have in our life, going by how many breaths we normally take per minute and then multiply that by, we don't know how many years we have, so we can't be sure how many breaths we'll have. But anyway, the point is, the number of breaths we have before we die is decreasing all the time. Therefore, the present breath, even if not the last, is certainly one breath closer to death. And then he has a refrain, every breath closer to death, every breath closer to death. That's his advice on a meditative practice one can do to practice mindfulness of death, recollection of death. But I was wondering, does this mean that it's something we should be doing constantly, every moment of our day, whether we're on the cushion or off? I'm not sure, but it seems like that would make it hard to do anything else. For example, other practices that we might do, other meditations, as well as working, cooking, building the Buddha hall. Yeah, if we were just constantly, every single moment, aware, this might be my last breath, this might be my last breath, then, I don't know. It's hard to believe. That's really something we should be doing, unless you're living in the forest, like the Thai monks, and don't have so many other things to do. But even there, the Buddha himself said that one should cultivate these 7 awakening factors, which are mindfulness, I don't know them by heart, so I had to look them up. Mindfulness, investigation of dharmas, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, equanimity, and not to mention things like the 4 immeasurable thoughts. In our tradition, and all traditions of Buddhism, those are very important. Compassion, love, and then in our tradition, bodhicitta. And these require putting our attention on those practices, those meditations, to cultivate those states of mind. So it would be hard to do while we're thinking of death every moment. But on the other hand, when the Buddha was talking, was giving this discourse, he was talking to a group of disciples, and surely those disciples are people who have heard many teachings from the Buddha and have decided to give up everything else and be a follower of the Buddha and spend all their time meditating on the Buddha's teachings, practicing what the Buddha taught. So they should be very familiar with the Buddha's teachings, with the path, with these awakening factors and so on. So I was thinking, this is just my own kind of thoughts, that the recollection of death perhaps is to be used more as an underlying awareness to help us remain mindful and continue practicing at all times, whether we're on the cushion or off the cushion. At all times, just have this underlying awareness that any moment could be my last moment, any breath could be my last breath, to keep our minds on track in the practice and not let our minds go astray, especially going into afflicted thoughts and maybe actions as well. So this is just my thoughts, that the practice of awareness of death, recollection of death, is to, at least in the beginning, to be practiced at certain times. Like you would sit down and decide, I'm going to do that practice and really focus on that. And then try to carry the awareness of that, the insights you gain from that, into the rest of your life, into post-meditation. But not to the extent that it would interfere with other activities that you need to do. Okay? But just to get to the point where it's an underlying awareness. I mean, I'm certainly not there yet, so I can't speak from experience, but I would think that eventually one could become so familiar with this awareness of death, this knowledge, this insight into the, personal impermanence, that it does become kind of ever-present and affecting one's life, one's choices, one's interactions with others, and so on. Because they do talk about that in the Tibetan tradition as well, that we do need to be mindful of impermanence and death at all times. But it does at all times mean every single moment, especially if you can't do two things, most of us can't really have two thoughts at the same time. But yeah, just find some way of keeping that awareness going, keeping the mindfulness going during our days and nights as well. And I was thinking too, as I was preparing this, there was a time when Venerable Chudren, I think it may have been a BBC, she was reading a letter from a student, and the student talked about a practice that she would do where she would watch her mind and watch the thoughts that would come up in her mind and ask herself, if I were to die at this moment, would I want to die with this thought in my mind? And that would really help her to, knock out, push away unhelpful thoughts or negative thoughts, I'm feeling critical of that person over there and what they are doing. If I were to die at this moment, would I want this to be in my mind? Would I want to die with that kind of thought? I thought that was a very good way of using death, thought of death, awareness of death, to deal with negative, disturbing thoughts that can pop up in our mind. So perhaps each person can explore and experiment and find their own way of doing this, of dealing with this. I visited a meditation center in Malaysia once, and they had a skeleton. I think it was an actual skeleton. Probably difficult to do that in America. It might be illegal to get real skeletons, but you can get plastic ones. But I think this was a real one. And it was hanging in the corner of the meditation hall, right there for you to see every time you go in and come into the meditation hall. So when I went to the dentist last year, it was around Halloween time, and they had this skeleton sitting on the counter, and I was thinking, yeah, we could get one of those for the Abbey. I think you can get it at Walmart or something like that. So, I mean, next Halloween, we should make sure we get one, or get a few. So that can be helpful. something like that, reminders of impermanence and death. Okay, so then to move on to something else, I think another reason that people are often uncomfortable and maybe fearful with regard to death is because of death being a separation from loved ones. Probably for many people, that's the biggest thing they're worried about and unhappy about, and I have to separate from loved ones. And I remember once I was teaching a course and talking, going through the 9-point death meditation, and one young woman said, I'm not afraid of myself dying, but I fear my parents dying. She was afraid of losing her parents. But then I wondered afterwards, but didn't she realize that when she died, she would also have to separate from her parents? Maybe she hadn't made that connection yet. But yeah, inevitably, one side is going to die before the other. Either you die before your parents do, and then you're separated from them, or they die before you do, and then you're separated from them, or whoever it is that is important to you, and you don't want to separate from. It's going to happen. It's inevitable, unavoidable. And when that does happen, then there can be a lot of painful feelings, sadness, grief, and so on. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be so sad or so painful. There are things we can do to prepare ourselves for that and alleviate much of the pain. So there's a discourse in here in a chapter 14 called Mindful Freedom from Grief. Okay, so the setting of this sutra is Rajgir. So the Buddha is in Rajgir, and also Ananda. I guess Ananda was always where the Buddha was, always with the Buddha. And Shariputra was somewhere else in Magadha. And he was sick and about to attain final nirvana, what we call parinirvana. And he had a kind of attendant named Kunda who was looking after him. And then Shariputra did, due to his illness, he did attain final nirvana. So his attendant, Kunda, took care of the cremation and then took the remains of Shariputra's body together with his robes and bowl and went to Rajgir. And he approached Ananda and gave the remains of Shariputra and the robes and the bowl to Ananda. And then Ananda goes to the Buddha, Blessed One, now my whole body is as if it were falling apart. The 4 directions are as if they had changed their order. The teachings I learned are as if they were blocked off, because the novice Kunda has come to me and told me that Shariputra has attained parinirvana. So when I read that, I felt kind of comfortable in a way, because it sounded like the way I felt after my mother passed away. Yeah, so I really tried to prepare myself for my mother's death. After my father passed away, then I said to myself, my mother's going to be next, and that's going to be real hard. I knew it would be hard, so I would try to remind myself again and again that she's going to pass away, and I would even, in meditation, try to imagine that actual event and how I would feel, just to be prepared for it so it wouldn't be so difficult when it happened. But nevertheless, it was difficult. Like I said yesterday, it's really difficult to know how your mind is going to react. You can kind of imagine, hope, wish, expect, but what's really going to happen, what's really going to come up can be quite different than what you imagine. So it was quite difficult. And the actual moment that she died, I was with her. I was actually quite clear and calm, and I could kind of do things like call the priest and send an email to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, please pray for my mother, and then do Medicine Buddha and so on. So I was able to manage all those things. But it was the next day after the body had been taken away and I was alone in her house. Then it hit me and it was like, wow, it was like being hit by a train. So it was difficult. And for several weeks after that, I was just like in an altered state of mind. It wasn't bad. It was just weird. It was just like he said, it's like the directions of reversed order and your body's falling apart and you kind of... Anyway, it was... And also this book by Guy Newland where he writes about his wife passing away. It's called A Grief Observed. And he also talked about just feeling... I don't remember the exact words he used, but just really spaced out. So to read that Ananda, so Ananda is somebody who'd been with the Buddha continuously for many, 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 many years, and he probably heard hundreds or even thousands of teachings from the Buddha, although he was at this point in time, still an ordinary being, not yet I don't know if he was even an Arya, but it's certainly hadn't attained nirvana. So he still had defilements in his mind. But still, the fact that, he was so shocked and even kind of shattered by Shariputra's death. So that I think it's not surprising if we have these kind of reactions. So we shouldn't feel worried or ashamed. And they do pass. So then the Buddha replied, and his reply is very interesting. So I'll read his words. He says, "How is it, Ananda? Has Shariputra attained final nirvana and taken away the receiving of the aggregate of precepts? Has he attained final nirvana and taken away the aggregate of concentration? Has he attained final nirvana and taken away the aggregate of wisdom? Has he attained final nirvana and taken away the aggregate of liberation? Has he attained nirvana and taken away the aggregate of knowledge and vision of liberation?" It was a little hard to understand what he was saying, but in Bhikkhu Analayo's explanation, basically what the Buddha is saying is, by Shariputra passing away, have all these teachings and practices, especially ethics, concentration, wisdom, the means for attaining liberation, have they gone? Are they gone? Have they been taken away? Are they no more existing? And Ananda says no. And then the Buddha went on and did the same with the what are called the 37 aids to awakening. So these are 37 different practices: the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 4 basic, and so on and so forth. So these 37 practices, which are also attained along the way to nirvana or enlightenment. So Buddha asks, have those been taken away? Are those no longer existing? Ananda says no. But then he goes on to say, he talks about Shariputra and all the qualities of Shariputra, that he was virtuous, learned, he had few wishes and was contented, continually practiced seclusion. So he goes on and on and on with all these, all this praise of Shariputra, what a wonderful person Shariputra was, and he ends up saying that he was able to teach, to illuminate, to delight, and extol when teaching the Dharma. So he says, for these reasons, Blessed One, because of the Dharma and because of those who receive the Dharma, I am sad and distressed. So it's quite likely this is what we would feel when our teachers pass away as well. We're sad that they are gone, but also thinking of the Dharma and thinking of the disciples who, might be still new or not yet met the Dharma, that they're they're kind of missing the chance to meet that teacher and receive teachings from them. So that's a good reason, a kind of valid reason to be sad and distressed when some great being like Shariputra or the Dalai Lama or any of our teachers were to pass away. So, what does the Buddha say next? He says to Ananda, do not be sad and distressed. Why do I say that? What arises, what occurs, what is constructed is of a nature to be destroyed. How could it not be destroyed? Wishing for it not to be destroyed is wishing for what is impossible. I have told you earlier, various kinds of things and agreeable matters, everything for which one has thoughts of affection, all of it is entirely of a nature to become separated from. One cannot keep it forever. So just reminding Shariputra of the nature of all things, that even the things we value and cherish and want to be together with forever and ever, this is something impossible. Their very nature is that they will pass. And then he talks about how the great disciples in the community will be the ones who attain nirvana first. And then he also talks about how he himself will soon be in the past. And I think the Buddha did pass away not long after Shariputra, right? So he's helping Ananda get ready for that. And then he goes on to say, therefore, Ananda, you should have yourself as an island by relying on yourself. You should have the Dharma as an island by relying on the Dharma. You should have no other island, no other reliance. And Ananda asked the Buddha, how do I do that? And then the Buddha gives a discourse on the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Very similar words to what is in the Satipatthana Sutra. So I won't read all of that, but basically practicing mindfulness with regard to the body, with regard to feelings, with regard to the mind, with regard to dharmas, phenomena. And in this way, one is able to overcome desire and discontent in the world. And so he says, this is what it means to be oneself as an island and to have the Dharma as an island. And when the Buddha finished hearing what the Buddha said, the monastics were delighted and received it respectfully. So just to share some of what Bhikkhu Analayo says about this. He says, this discourse offers, so in addition to, of course, a teaching on the importance of practice, he said it also offers a tool for relating to grief, illustrating self-reliance with the evocative image of an island. The way to become self-reliant and reliant on the Dharma is to be found in the cultivation of the 4 Satipatthanas. These are not spoken of so much in the Tibetan tradition, but they are there. They're in the philosophical teachings, and it is said that a bodhisattva needs to practice these and cultivate these. So this is the way to become like an island to oneself and at the same time to rely on the Dharma, namely through the practice of mindfulness. The mindfulness enables one to understand as it is to understand as it really is what happens within and around oneself, and also to understand how this relates to the teachings, the Dharma. And then he talks about how in the case of experiencing grief because of the death of a loved one, a central aspect of the teachings is to be recollected with mindfulness, would be impermanence. So dealing with grief of a loved one. And grief is something that can happen even before separation. Because when I was with my mother in the final weeks of her life, we knew that she was going to pass away because she had a lot of cancer in her body. I came across this term, anticipatory grief. And I thought, that's what I'm feeling. That term was like precisely what I was feeling. She hadn't yet passed away, but there's this awareness that she will pass away. She will be gone soon. So even before separation, that feeling of grief can be there. So being more familiar with impermanence, it does take time, but just reminding ourselves again and again of impermanence. And as the Buddha said, there's nothing that we may be fond of or attached to that will be there forever. So just getting to an understanding of that and acceptance of that will help us deal with grief. And just some thoughts that I had about this idea of an island. It's a little tricky because using the term an island, being an island to yourself, it could sound as though we should just stay by ourselves, cut ourselves off from others, not have relationships with others, and so on. But I'm sure the Buddha didn't mean that, because he himself stayed most of the time with his disciples, and his followers, the monks and nuns, also stayed together in communities. Some of them may have gone off and stayed by themselves, but there's a lot of emphasis on the community, because the meaning of Sangha, the conventional meaning of Sangha, is at least 4 or more fully ordained monastics living in the same place, so that they can conduct certain rites that are part of our monastic life, monastic training. So there is a lot of emphasis on community, community living. And so it's not so much a question of whether you're staying all by yourself or you're staying with other people, but rather your attitude, the state of mind that you have with regard to others. And what's problematic is attachment, that state of mind. Attachment, clinging, craving, so there's different terms for that state of mind. And that is what brings problems in relationships and community life. And it's also the thing that causes suffering of grief, not wanting to separate from our friends, our family, and so on. So attachment is based on ignorance that doesn't understand the true nature of things, the reality of things, and wishes things to be permanent. So it's kind of, there's a sense of I am permanent. I am a real fixed thing existing somewhere within my body and mind, and I am permanent. I'm going to be here forever. This isn't something we may think intellectually, but it's more of a gut level feeling, just an attitude that we have. And then seeing other people, especially our loved ones, our family and friends, they also have a real self, a real I over there. And because that we enjoy so much, we have so much happiness and pleasure with that person, we want them to always be there and have those pleasant experiences with the person. So attachment usually has this wishful thinking of permanence. I'm going to be here forever, the other person's going to be there forever, and we're just going to enjoy this wonderful situation, this wonderful relationship forever. We don't want it to ever end. So obviously that's unrealistic. It would be crazy to expect that could actually happen. But most people just don't think about it. They don't want to think about it. They try to, they push away such thoughts. They don't want to think about this impending separation. And I've also encountered people who, this is mainly in the Chinese tradition, I think, like Singapore, they actually think it's bad luck to think about death and impermanence. That if they think about that, they'll make it happen sooner. So they actually have some reason. It's a wrong reason, but it's a reason why they push aside the thought of death. So that could make it particularly challenging. But that doesn't make any sense. I mean, there might be somebody we don't like, and we think about that person and hope that person will disappear from the world. But is that going to make it happen? Probably not. So even if we want someone to disappear, to die, to no longer exist, we can't make that happen just with our thoughts. So our thoughts are not that powerful unless we act on them, do something to bring about the death of someone. But no, we can't cause someone to die just with our thoughts. So that's just unrealistic to think that way. And the purpose of contemplating impermanence and death isn't to make the separation happen sooner, but to prepare ourselves for it, just to ready ourselves for that separation so that we're not totally carried away with grief and sadness and fall apart and unable to go on. But we can learn something from that experience, grow from that experience. And I was actually thankful that I felt such feelings when my mother passed away, because I thought, oh, now I know what grief is like. You know, you sometimes see other people grieving, see photographs in the newspaper of somebody who's lost a child in an earthquake or whatever, and they're just like, oh, you know, almost like screaming in pain. And it was hard for me to really relate to that until I had my own experience of it. So that's one benefit of going through a painful experience, is then you know what it's like for other people who are going through that, and you can be more compassionate, have more empathy, more better able to help them as well to get through that experience. And it does pass. Grief does pass. I think it's also good to explore grief, the feeling of grief. What's really going on there? Because it might seem like sadness for the other person, concern for the other person. But if we really check carefully and honestly, what we might find is we're sad for ourselves. We're grieving for ourselves. I don't get to enjoy that person's presence anymore. I don't get to have all the pleasant experiences and feel the love and receive the gifts and the attention and so on and so forth that I got from that person. So I am missing out on all the pleasure and happiness and good experiences that I had with that person. So this is something to check in yourself. And if you do discover that, then no point in beating yourself up and thinking, oh, I'm so selfish, I'm so ego-centered. It's normal, it's natural to feel this way, so we shouldn't deny our feelings. But we also don't have to buy into them. We don't have to go along, let our mind get carried away, totally caught up in that feeling. And I think it is helpful to recognize that ego and self-centered aspect of grief. And then we can transform this situation, this experience, into genuine love and compassion and concern for the other person. And even if they've already passed away, there are things we can do to benefit them. So following the death of someone, we can do prayers, we can do practices, we can ask others to do prayers and practices, we can create merit and dedicate it for that person. So we can continue to show our love and our concern. And it's better to focus on that aspect of the death of someone rather than on what I am missing out on. Poor me. But on the other hand, don't deny that. I'm not saying we should deny our feelings of sadness and grief, but understand that they are natural and they will pass. They won't last forever. And it's also helpful to work on, in our relationships now, to work on decreasing attachment to the other person and increasing love, genuine love and affection, which is focused more on the other person. So sometimes people have trouble differentiating attachment and love. And some people even think they're the same thing. According to Buddhism, they're not. And one way to tell the difference is that love is more focused on the other person, what we can do for them, how we can make them happy. So focusing on that aspect. I want you to be happy. I care about you. What can I do to make you happy? Whereas attachment is more focused on me. I need you to make me happy. I want you to stay around because you do all these things for me and you make me feel so good and whatever. But it's more about me and my needs, my wishes. So we can start by recognizing that in our own experience. When our attitude is more attachment, more about me, I need you there to make me feel good, to fulfill my needs and wishes. So just recognizing that and differentiating it from genuine love, which is more about the other person, valuing them, cherishing them, wanting to make them happy. So I think our feelings are usually a mixture of both. Those two things are kind of mixed up, but we can start by recognizing the difference. There is a difference between attachment and love, and attachment is unhealthy. There's a lot of teachings on that, on the faults or disadvantages of attachment. That's the thing that usually leads to problems in relationships. When we don't get what we want, it's the other person's fault. And then we can get into anger and blame and conflicts and so on and so forth. So whatever problems happen in relationships, if we check carefully, we'll probably be able to find attachment involved. Whereas if we could have more genuine love, pure unconditional love, there would be fewer problems. And also attachment is like self-defeating. We're setting ourselves up for suffering because that person isn't going to be there forever. Even before they die, they might go away. There might be a separation for one reason or another. Relationship falls apart, the other person is sent overseas to work. So wanting and expecting to be with that person constantly, all the time, never be separated from them. Having that kind of attitude is just creating the cause to suffer when we are separated from them. So it's helpful to see how attachment leads to suffering rather than to happiness. And it's also one of the main things that keeps us in samsara. So if we want to be free of samsara and attain nirvana, attain liberation, attain enlightenment, attachment is something we need to overcome. Whereas love, on the other hand, genuine, unconditional love is only beneficial. It doesn't have any faults or disadvantages. It's good for us, it's good for the other person. It's one of the factors we need to cultivate to progress along the path and attain enlightenment. So if we can see that, comparing those two states of mind and see the pros of love, unconditional love, and the cons of attachment, that'll help us to want to work on this more, decrease the attachment and increase the love. And there's lots of methods in Buddhism for how we can do that. So, yeah, in this sutra, I like what the Buddha says to Ananda, that when a person dies, even an amazing being like Shariputra or the Buddha himself or His Holiness or any of our teachers, it's very sad that they have passed away, but they don't take the Dharma away. The Dharma is the thing that's really important, really valuable, really precious in our life. The knowledge we have of the Dharma and our practice of the Dharma, the insights that we get from the Dharma, nobody can take that away. Death cannot take that away. So the Dharma is still there. And if we can develop a stronger connection with the Dharma, make the Dharma really a strong part of our life, then and realize we can still practice it, even when we ourselves are dying and leaving this life behind. then that gives us some comfort, even in the loss of a very important person. The next and final part of the 9-point meditation on death, I thought that could be done in the next session. So that point, the main point, is looking at what helps us at the time of death. So we've already thought about how death is definite, the time is indefinite, it could be any day, any minute. Then naturally there's some concern there. So what do I do? How do I die? What will help me at that time? There's 3 points to think about. The first is family and friends. Can they help me at the time of death? Will they be able to help me? And hopefully we'll realize, even if they can help, whatever help they give is limited. I mean, one thing is there's no guarantee that they will be there. People sometimes die far away from home, and there's no chance for family and friends to come and be with you. So we may not have them around us when we die. And even if they are there, how much help can they give us? I mean, many people, ordinary people, they're going to be so caught up in their own feelings of grief and sadness and loss and confusion and maybe even crying and, is that going to be helpful as we die? One time I was teaching this course in a Dharma group in Marin County near San Francisco. And I asked the people to do a meditation, like an imagining the world's going to end. Like those disaster movies where, there's an asteroid heading to Earth, and then there's only a matter of time, and the whole Earth's going to be destroyed, everyone's going to die. So in the last hours of your life, before the Earth ends, where would you like to be? And what would you like to be doing? So I asked them to imagine that, and then afterwards we talked about it. And most of the people said they wanted to be with their family, which is natural. I want to be with my loved ones. But one guy, he said, I want to be with Geshe Gawan Drakpa over in Sechonling. So that's the Dharma Center in San Francisco, the FPMT Center, and there's a wonderful Geshe there, Geshe Gawan Drakpa. And this man has been a long-term Dharma practitioner. So I thought, he's very smart. Where's the best place to be? Who's the best person to be with? Would be a teacher, or at least Dharma friends who can, help remind you of the positive thoughts and practices you want to have in your mind as you're dying. Being with ordinary people, family and friends, they're probably, what are you going to do? What are you going to talk about? Probably a lot of people are going to be scared and crying or talk about the good old times we had. But is that really helpful before you die? And I know one nun who passed away, and down in the land of Kalmabaiting near Santa Cruz, there's a little house they've dedicated as a hospice, Tara hospice. So when someone's dying, they can go and stay there, and then they're looked after by people. And she was so fortunate because there were several lamas who were in the area at the time. Kirti Sanjay Rinpoche was one, and he went to visit her just before she died and spent a long time with her. And then Lama Zopa Rinpoche came and stayed with her for a while before she died. And I thought, wow, she's so fortunate. I wish I could, to have wise and compassionate beings around before you die. That would be the best. Just to remind you of what to do and help you to calm down, help you to be in a positive state of mind. But then again, that's not sure that we will have that possibility. So it's much better, as the Buddha said to Shariputra, if we can learn to be an island or a refuge, another term that's sometimes used, be a refuge into yourself. Be a lamp unto yourself. That you yourself know how to take care of yourself, how to take care of your mind, what you need to do before you die, just in case you're all by yourself and there's nobody around who can do that for you. So recognizing that family and friends may not be so helpful, and also they can't go with us when we die. We leave them behind. Then the next thing is possessions. Can we get help from our possessions, our money, our property, that we use a lot, enjoy a lot during our life, but when we die, Again, those have to be left behind. We can't take a single scent or a single piece of clothing or shoes or your favorite knickknacks or even your Dharma books, your statues on your altars. So none of those things can be taken with us. They have to be left behind as well. And then if we have attachment for things, if we have attachment for people, or if we have attachment for our possessions, that can be a big hang-up at the time of death. There's this funny story they tell in the Tibetan tradition about a monk who was dying, and he was lying in his bed and very sick and, approaching death. But it was taking a long time, just kind of hanging on. And his teacher, who was in the monastery and had some clairvoyance, picked up what was going on with this monk, and he had a bowl of Tibetan tea. Tibetans love their Tibetan tea, and they usually have these little wooden bowls that they keep tea in. So there was a bowl of Tibetan tea on the table beside his bed, and his teacher realized he was attached to his Tibetan tea. And so he sent a message. He asked a monk to bring a message to this dying monk. It said, "There's better Tibetan tea in Tushita, Pure Land." So I guess the monk realized what was hanging him up, and he was able to let go. And hopefully he did go to Tushita, Pure Land. But even something simple like that can be something that hangs you up, obstacle to being able to just let go and die peacefully. And then the third thing is our body. So that could also be something that we are attached to as we die. Again, as we looked at in the beginning meditation, we do have this tendency to identify with our body and feel this is me. And so that can be hard to let go of as we pass away. So again, it's helpful to learn to de-identify with our body, let go of our attachment to our body. So none of those things can help us as we die, and the only thing that can help us is Dharma. The knowledge that we have of Dharma, the practices we've trained in, the virtue we've created as we've lived our life. So those are the things that will be helpful to us to remember, to keep in mind as we die, and then to make that transition from this life to the next. Again, it's our karma, good karma and bad karma, that determines our experiences both at the time of death and also where we go next, our next life. So someone who's created a lot of merit, who's taken a lot of teachings and practiced them, meditated on them, transformed their mind, created merit and so on, they have nothing to worry about at the time of death. It's definite that they will have a peaceful passing and a good rebirth. But to be able to have that, we have to practice Dharma. We have to learn and practice Dharma as much as we can during our life. So this is the ideal conclusion to come to, although it may take a while before you realize that. But this is then the whole point of the meditation, to realize how important it is to practice Dharma, to make Dharma a really important, integral part of our life and our mind. And in that way, it will be there for us at the end of our life and help us get through that experience and move on to the next life. Question?
There's one online. Someone says, what are some Buddhist rituals or practices one can ask family and friends to conduct at the time of one's death or afterwards?
Well, there's many, many, many. I think partly it depends on what you're most familiar with. Like in the Tibetan tradition, we have many practices that we do, like different deities, Tara, Chenrezig, and so on. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that the best practice to do before death, during death, and after death, praying for someone after they died, is Medicine Buddha. That's the one he recommends. Other teachers might recommend other practices. But, yeah. I mean, it depends to the tradition. If you're in the Chinese tradition or in the Pali tradition, then they would have their own recommended practices for dying. But the main point is something that will help the person be in a positive state of mind, remember Dharma thoughts and insights, so that their mind can pass smoothly and in a positive way. It's better not to try to introduce something unfamiliar to the person who's dying, something they never heard before, and it's like that could make them feel confused. And so it's better to know what the person is familiar with and comfortable with and talk about them or do that practice. I'll talk more about that this afternoon. So this afternoon we'll look at specific practices we can do to prepare ourselves for death, and then a little bit about things we can do to help others who are in that situation.